Hello, my name is Rahul Mitra. I'm an associate professor at Wayne State University, and welcome back to my webinar series on research training and professional development. This is the third webinar of the series. So let me share my screen with you, and then we'll get started. So the topic for today is how to search for relevant sources for a literature review with the qualification that this is for a qualitative research paper. That's pretty much my wheelhouse. So um, a lot of times your instructor tells you that you have to submit an 8-page literature review on a topic of your choice. And sometimes this can be a standalone assignment, or sometimes it's part of your conference paper that you need to submit at the end of the semester. You've know a little bit about finding research articles and book chapters online. We covered that in our second webinar series, actually. But how do you know what to look for when you're not quite sure what the specific articles and the book chapters and the authors that you need to include in your literature review are? And how do you find that? So that's pretty much the conundrum that I'm going to be helping you with a little bit today. So um, to begin with, it's always a good idea to focus on what the goal of the literature review is. What purpose does it really serve in the larger research paper? And a great way to answer this question is by actually reading this amazing book by Karen Golden Biddle and Karen Locke called Composing Qualitative Research. This is a really helpful book. The second edition came out in 2017. And this is the one that I generally refer to. Um, and there are a few things that Karen really mention in their book that I think is fantastic and will really help you in thinking about what the goal of the literature review section really is, and proceeding from that, how you can really go around to find the right things to put in it. So the literature review first of all, is really important to articulate the so what question of your project. Why is it significant? And if you're stumped a little bit about, answering the so what question, I really recommend checking out my colleague Sarah Tracy from Arizona State University's a YouTube series, Get Your Qual On. Just Google it or type it in YouTube, because Sarah does a wonderful job in really helping you try to figure out what is really important, the core question that you want to ask related to a topic, why it's important and why it's significant. The literature review helps you situate that significance in relation to the broader work that's going on in your field of study. So that's pretty much the second point right here. It helps you showcase your work not just as a standalone project, but as part really of a broader movement of research. And in some cases, this research can really be across multiple disciplines, not just in your own discipline. So for example, if you were doing a project on leadership in virtual teams, you might draw from research in organizational communication, which is my field. You could draw it from leadership studies, organization studies. You could draw from CMC or computer mediated communication work. You could even draw from group communication work. So in some cases, especially when you're doing work that is interdisciplinary and really crosses across different fields, it really helps to have a literature review that draws from across these different areas so that you can really situate the contributions of your work. At the same time, it also means that you need to be careful that you are referring to the correct sources as well as the adequate sources, right? So just to go back to that old example, leadership in virtual teams, if a lot of your literature review just focuses on leadership, how leaders enact different behaviors and styles and how they communicate with their team members, but you miss that virtual component, that really important aspect of the virtual environment where in which the team communication actually occurs, then your literature review hasn't quite addressed all of the important elements of your topic. And so you might need to then brush up on your CMC or computer mediated communication sources. The third important goal that Golden Biddle and Locke really focus on is that the literature review helps you interrogate, well, they call it problematize, the literature to make space for your study to contribute, right? So it's one thing to situate your study in the broader field, but it's another thing to then also say, well, not only am I looking at leadership and virtual teams, but how is my study really pushing the boundaries and extending the work that is already out there on leadership in virtual teams? So you're interrogating or problematizing the existing literature. And there are a few things that you can do in order to problematize the literature. One really common strategy is to highlight the gaps in knowledge, right? Where you not only are you talking about how previous work has tended to look at this issue, but maybe you find out that a lot of the literature hasn't really looked at leadership in virtual teams in a particular industry or a particular context. And that's the gap in knowledge that you really are trying to fill. We'll highlight that. Another way to interrogate the literature is to really point out the novel contribution you might be making methodologically speaking. Maybe you're studying a new site. Maybe you're studying using a new method of analysis or data collection. So highlight that. And then finally, as a communication scholar, because so much of our work as communication scholars is interdisciplinary, it really helps if we really highlight the role of communication in a lot of these disparate settings. So with leadership in virtual teams, how does communication really become important in how leaders are able to direct and collaborate and work with all of their virtual teams? And then finally, the literature review really becomes helpful to foreshadow how your study will address this problematization. So it's one thing to identify the gap in knowledge, to identify the methodological contribution, or to identify the role of communication in this process. The next step you have to do is then highlight and articulate very nicely about what your study will bring to the table and how it will address this gap in the knowledge, or what specifically your methodological contribution is going to be, or how exactly is your study going to address the role of communication in this project. So that can mean paying attention to the context, right, of study. It can mean paying attention to the theoretical framework that you are bringing to the table, or of course, it can also mean paying attention to the method. So lastly, I hope this slide helped you understand a little bit about, what the goals of the literature review are meant to be. And once you know the goal, the next step is figuring out the path that you need to get on in order to make this goal a reality. So how do you select the right journal articles or right book chapters or right books from the mountains of amazing scholarly research that is out there online, right? We're talking virtually. I'm going to outline a few selection strategies to help you. So the first one, start with your course reading list. It's unlikely that you're going to be writing a course paper a term paper for a course that has absolutely no connection to any of the readings or the work that you've been doing in that course, right? So that means your course reading list, and some reading lists, some have both required as well as recommended readings. These readings on your course reading list are a great resource. They're a great starting point. Remember, starting point, where you can start building your reference list. Another great starting point is your instructor. So reach out and talk to your instructor, tell him or her what your intended project is going to be, get ideas from her or him about what kind of articles to cite and look at, which authors you should be reading more of. So your instructor and the course reading list are the first two really great resources. Now, after that, it's generally a snowball selection method. Just as a snowball gathers steam as it rolls on the hill, once you've found a couple of really good articles from your course reading list or suggested by your instructor that really makes a lot of sense, I'm sure you'll see through through those articles, references to other scholarly journals or book chapters in the citation list. Use those then that really make the most sense to you, and then just repeat the process. Rinse, repeat, and go on. So this is the snowball selection method, and generally a lot of beginning literature reviews really start with this snowball selection process. What's another strategy? Another strategy is going directly to the journals and books or authors who publish the most work relevant to your field or the topic that you're going to be studying, right? And for this selection strategy is a little bit more advanced than the first one. And so you do need to do that first snowball method first in order to know even what kind of articles or books or chapters or authors you need to refer to. A good giveaway is seeing, for instance, if you find a really great article that makes a lot of sense to you, and if you go to the reference page, and if you see that most of the articles that this article is cited are from a particular journal, say Management Communication Quarterly, which is really well known for organizational communication scholars, that's a great giveaway. Then you'll go to MCQ and you'll hit search for keywords related to your project. You want to be a little careful that you cover both foundational sources. And these are generally older sources that have really set the ball rolling on the literature in a particular field, as well as newer sources. You want to get a good balance of both old and new sources. If you only cover the newer sources, for instance, arguably you're missing a lot of the important theoretical grounding, a lot of the discussions that really framed the topic when the literature first emerged. And simultaneously, if you're only looking at those foundational sources, you might be missing a lot of the more recent, really cutting edge research that is pushing the boundaries on this topic. So you do want to cover both foundational and newer courses. This process is really an iterative process. There's really no single step-by-step way of doing this. It's a process of going through journals and articles, reading them, looking at the reference list, finding new journals and articles, reading them, talking with people, and going back to articles that you read earlier. So this is a messy process, but it's an important process to really help you understand how the field or multiple fields, if you're working on an interdisciplinary project, have really addressed the topic that you're interested in. I will say that article databases can be helpful, but you need to be a little careful about using article databases that are often made available through your research library, of your university. The reason being is that when you are typing in keywords in your article databases, you might actually just be confronted with information overload. So that's why actually this article database strategy is listed number 4 over here, because unless you have by this time a really well-defined understanding of which major scholars or books or journal article or journals that you should be referring to, the database strategy can be a little bit overwhelming. It's like being snowballed. It's being under a pile of snowballs or emails for that matter. Lastly, Google Scholar. Google Scholar is really, really great, especially for getting, I found in my experience, for getting interdisciplinary journal articles and very recent journal articles. In some cases, journals that you didn't even think of earlier. So just type in scholar.google.com and use your keywords for the article that you for your topic, and that will be really, really helpful. Other additional sources, academia.edu and researchgate.net, they're social networking sites for academics. A lot of academics will upload book chapters and journal articles on these websites. And in some cases, especially I think for journals which have a paywall that your library doesn't subscribe to, or book chapters that again you can't really access unless you buy the book or that are available through your library system. Academia.edu and researchgate.net can be really, really helpful. But even over here, you need to be a little careful because the date and relevance to the topic are really, really important. So let's just take one quick example to illustrate what we've been talking about so far. So suppose this is the topic of your paper, ethical leadership practices for corporate social responsibility communications. Of course, it's an OrgComm paper because I'm an OrgComm scholar. What would you do, right? So first of all, you need to zero in on the topics you're going to search. And in this case, given that this is the topic that you want to look at, you'll want to look at ethical leadership. You'll want to look at corporate social responsibility communication, or CSR. But you'll probably also want to look at just CSR practices in general. Next, you'll want to look up the readings in your course that really focus on these issues. So in the course I'm teaching right now, for instance, the second module really starts looking at ethics and sustainability and CSR. And so that module with the required and recommended readings list is the best place to start sourcing journal articles and book chapters for your research. Also a good idea to ask your instructor's advice for key authors and citations. If they know of someone who's doing work specifically related to this topic or cutting edge work that might not be really available in the readings that you, in your course reading list. So your instructor will be really, really helpful. Again, use the snowball approach to find the relevant readings. Webinar 1 is a great way to find research online, and you can use the training from that webinar to help you find the specific citations. Next, number 3, you've got keywords, right? CSR communication, ethical leadership. Use these keywords, type them into the search button of specific journals that specialize in this kind of research. So for this topic, for instance, Management Communication Quarterly, Human Relations, Journal of Business Ethics, Leadership, and the Journal of Corporate Citizenship are some great places to start. You'll also notice that all of these journals are really cut across different disciplines. Ethical leadership practices and CSR really are interdisciplinary topics. So whereas you've got some journals over here that are distinctly more OrgComm centered, like MCQ and Human Relations, you've also got more broader leadership and organization studies based journals. finally, you want to make sure that you cover both foundational and some of those cutting edge recent sources. And to do that, I would double check with journal citations, Google Scholar, and ResearchGate.net. Personally, I always use Google Scholar regardless of what I'm doing on specific journals, because Google Scholar really allows me again to see what articles have been most cited, again, which goes to the foundational aspects of the work, as well as which articles are the most recently published ones, which helps me get at that cutting edge aspect of the work. Finally, you'll notice that I've got article databases coming in last over here as well. It's still a good idea to check them out if you are truly stumped, if you are working on a truly esoteric topic, perhaps that there hasn't really been much traction on. Article databases from your university library might be a great way to help. Um, The next part is pretty much what I'm going to be continuing on for the next webinar. Once you've got all these articles, you've got all these resources, you need to start sorting them so that you start understanding how you're going to arrange and organize and address all of these different articles and sources together. So sort them according to topics first, and then that will help you address what you want to do. So that's it for now. Thank you so much for taking part and being and watching this webinar. And I hope this was helpful. And you have a great day.